of war. My days and nights while stationed at Fort Campbell were a great time for me. To say the very least, those 23 months were the most interesting part of my life. I say interesting because although my primary occupation was in communications, I was temporarily transferred to the Military Police Division to work as a security guard. Since fixing broken antennas, radios, and other comm gear was far from exciting, I very much enjoyed doing those daytime and nighttime security patrols along the mostly quiet back roads and secluded areas in and around the large base. However, I did have more than a couple, what I would call, strange encounters during the conduct of these patrols. One of these encounters wasn't anything you might consider highly unusual, or maybe it was. I mean no disrespect by saying that I am well aware that our government has plenty of secrets. The world is full of unseen dangers, and there are, of course, some things that are best kept under wraps in the interest of protecting not only Americans, but those countries with which we are allies. I'll give you an example. One of the biggest secrets maintained by the United States government was to conceal an entire American city from the outside world, even from fellow Americans. The city is called Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and it's actually just a few hours' drive east of Fort Campbell. For those who don't know its extraordinary history, the U.S. government built the entire city of Oak Ridge in just a matter of months, back in the 1940s. It was intentionally hidden, tucked away inside 60,000 acres of land, purchased in the undeveloped and isolated backwoods of Tennessee. The entire city, everything right down to the city streets, stoplights, and sewers, was planned and constructed by the U.S. government to house one specific group of people. These were the tens of thousands of civilian personnel, along with their families, who were secretly relocated into Oak Ridge to accomplish one goal: to acquire and prepare the materials needed to manufacture the newly developed atomic bomb. The year 1942. The A-bomb was a new wonder weapon of mass destruction, and it was going to end the war, if not tragically. During World War II, the city of Oak Ridge was a vital part of the then top-secret Manhattan Project. As such, its very existence was kept hidden from the outside world. It wasn't even listed on maps for several years, not until after the war was over. Now, imagine how hard it is to keep an entire city a secret like that. What would happen, hypothetically, if some random hiker got lost and stumbled into the town? I have no idea. But if a private citizen learns about a government secret like that, it's probably a big surprise for him. The person might have a hard time keeping quiet about it. And if a secret that big gets out, the rest of the world would soon know everything about it. You can only imagine the potential consequences of Oak Ridge being discovered, the damage to the Manhattan Project, and the impact it would have had on the war. So you can probably also imagine the lengths to which the U.S. government went to keep it from being discovered. Let's just say I personally wouldn't want to be that random hiker. But unlike a civilian, if a person in the military, like myself, happens to stumble across something top secret, they at least understand it could be damaging to national security, and certainly to their own career, to talk about it. So they're more inclined not to do so. Again, I tell you this because when I was in the Army, stationed on Fort Campbell, there was a time when I thought me and my buddy, whom I'll just identify as Corporal Lack, might have stumbled across something like that. Something that we weren't supposed to have seen. Now, something you should know about Lack. Overall, he was a good soldier, professional, easygoing, and he had a good sense of humor when it was appropriate. You pretty much couldn't help but like him. But Lack also had a habit of being a little too serious at times, and one night in February of 1988, it put both of us in a very bad position. Nearly got both of us killed, in fact.
Bravo 47, this is Command. Command over.
This is Bravo 47. Send it.
What's your current location?
One cold night in February, while we were conducting our routine patrol around Fort Campbell, Black and I received an unexpected radio call. Our dispatch informed us that they'd been contacted by the nearby dispatch center, Clarksville Police Department, because they'd received a 911 call about a possible crash of a small civilian plane, someone having spotted it flying low over the base's southern fence line. Since the caller said they thought that the plane had crashed on the base, the local civilian police couldn't conduct the initial investigation, so they called the base police. Black and I were patrolling in that general vicinity of the base, so we were assigned to search the area where the caller believed the plane may have gone down. We were somewhat skeptical. Planes don't exactly crash every day. So as we drove around the area, we didn't really expect to find anything. This area of the base was less heavily forested, having some open patches of land scattered alongside the roads. After a bit of slow driving in the dark, shining the truck spotlights along the tree lines as we went, we suddenly saw what indeed appeared to be a crash site in one of these open fields. Getting out of the truck with our flashlights, we walked quickly, although very carefully, towards the wreckage, shining our lights around, trying not to step on any of the countless pieces of wreckage and debris. In hindsight, I maybe should have radioed our dispatch right away, before leaving the truck, to confirm that we had found a downed aircraft. But in the heavy darkness, I suppose we were curious and wanted to confirm what it was before reporting it, as well as to check for survivors who needed help. The pile of wreckage was billowing some steam, which was quite visible in the beams of the flashlights. The main fuselage lay among scattered debris, sitting in the middle of the field, about 75 yards from the road, about the same distance from the tree line behind it. As we got closer to the main body of the aircraft, we were shocked to realize that these were not the remains of a civilian plane. It was one of our own Apache attack helicopters, or rather, it was what was left of one. Unable to detect the smell of spilled fuel, nor seeing any indication it might catch fire, we kept approaching it, hoping again to first check for any survivors, although the general appearance of the crash site didn't seem hopeful. The ground showed a significant crater at its initial point of impact. Pieces of the helicopter were clearly buried in it, with a length of other impact points and bits of debris strewn along the ground in front of it, a number of detached rockets also laying scattered around the clearing. These additional craters indicated that it had likely bounced after its first impact, and then flipping or rolling a number of times before coming to a stop. Now the broken and twisted heap of metal that lay before us. Scanning the tree line behind it with our flashlights, there was a section of trees whose tops were noticeably damaged. Considering the 911 call about a low-flying aircraft, we figured that the helicopter must have clipped the treetops at a fast speed, which caused it to crash as hard and as abruptly as it did. The pilot probably had little or no time to react. The damage to the Apache, including its cockpit, was extensive. Seeing this, we knew then that there was little chance of either of the two pilots having survived. I told Lack to check the cockpit anyway, before I jogged back to our truck, carefully avoiding the debris, so I could radio back a report on the crash. And that was when this strange situation got even stranger. Wartime stories will continue right after this. And now, back to the story. This is Bravo 47 calling command. Come in, over.
Command to Bravo 47. Go ahead.
We are currently at... What the hell? Command, this is Bravo 47. You read me? Huh. Well, that's weird. Command, this is Bravo 47. Command, over. Right after my dispatch acknowledged my call-in, my transmission was suddenly drowned out by some kind of radio interference. A distinct electronic hum was the only thing I could hear. I clicked through the radio, trying a few other channels, but the same interference seemed to be preventing me from transmitting on those as well. Being my primary MOS was communications, I suspected, shall I say strongly suspected, that this wasn't just some kind of random interference with our radio. I had certainly never heard it before. I knew enough about radio signals to know when something strange was happening. Here, I'll give you an example. If you're ever driving down the road and listening to your car's radio, specifically AM radio, and you pass by some overhead power lines, you'll notice the radio signal will often either get fuzzy or be completely drowned out by static. That interference is caused by the electromagnetic energy coming off the high voltage power lines. However, out here in this empty field on Fort Campbell, there were no power lines or any other reasons for this kind of sudden, very powerful radio interference. I had no idea why, but it seemed very possible that the designated radio frequencies we were using were intentionally being jammed, on all available channels no less. Unable to send up a report, I impatiently tossed the radio handset onto the front seat. I then reached into the cargo area of the truck, grabbing a fire extinguisher, before jogging back over to the wreckage. Black was now standing right beside the airframe, staring at the pilot, who was still strapped to the rear seat, plainly visible through what little remained of the chopper's canopy. Starting to open my mouth, wanting to tell Lack about the issue with the radio, I suddenly stopped, my attention being drawn back to the pilot. He wasn't wearing the right uniform. In my experience, American pilots would normally have worn an olive green one-piece zippered flight suit. This man was wearing something that looked much more like the older Vietnam-era fatigues, OD green, with large buttons down the front of the blouse, the jacket. Shining my flashlight from various angles, looking for any other identifying markings, I then saw the patch of a foreign flag sewn onto his upper sleeve. My suspicions were confirmed. Having deployed to Central America myself, if only for a few weeks, I thought I had recognized the uniform he was wearing. A Honduran Army uniform. Very much out of place on someone piloting an American helicopter, I thought. He was wearing the right headgear, though, a pilot's helmet, which was equipped with its rather obvious integrated night vision hardware and target acquisition display. He was also very clearly dead. No surprise to us, though. We figured there was little chance of either the pilot or the gunner having survived a crash this bad. The nose of the helicopter having been practically obliterated on impact. The front part of the aircraft, where the gunner would have been seated, was just gone. If there had been two men in that helicopter, you wouldn't know it by looking at it. Looking back at Lack, who looked as confused as I was, I suddenly remembered the issue with the radio and told him about it. Not sure what else to do, we continued carefully walking around the wreckage, looking for anything else unusual while discussing what our best course of action was, what with not being able to communicate anything back to our command. Having a fire extinguisher on hand, we figured at least one of us should stay close to the wreckage, in case it caught fire. Being able to stop a fire as soon as it started might help preserve something important for whoever would end up investigating the crash. Suddenly, we heard the sound of vehicles approaching, soon followed by headlights on the nearby road. Now, things got even stranger. Two Humvees and an M35 troop transport truck sped up to the clearing, stopping abruptly. A dozen or so soldiers wearing black uniforms, very unusual, quickly filed out of the back of the deuce. They swiftly approached the wreckage, scanning the area, the two of us included, their M16s out and ready. Very odd behavior for investigating a crash site like this, I thought. Especially as they kept pointing loaded rifles at what were clearly two fellow soldiers. None of them wore any divisional insignia or had any name tags on their uniforms. They wore only a subdued patch of the American flag on their sleeve. One of them did have sergeant's bars on his collar, and another had a corporal's, but the others had no rank identifiers whatsoever. A colonel, a lieutenant colonel, and two majors then got out of the Humvees, identifiable by the rank they wore on their collars, but none of them had any divisional insignia or name tags either. As they approached us, still standing next to the wreckage, 4 soldiers from the larger group walked over and joined them. The colonel suddenly pointed at us and shouted, "You will leave now." Remember when I said Lack had a bad habit of taking his job too seriously? No. This is one of those times. He got, if you will, all formal and by the book. He firmly told the colonel that we were not leaving the area until we were properly relieved, according to the rules and regulations and all that. Well, the colonel was clearly not happy with his response. By the look on his face, his 2-second fuse was already halfway burnt. Personally, I felt that the regulations on this were pretty clear and obvious. The colonel was very much our superior officer, and he'd given us direct orders to leave. I was fine with obeying those orders and leaving right then and there. But for the life of me, I don't know what Lack was thinking. And I certainly did not expect what happened next. The colonel turned to one of the blacked out soldiers, the one wearing sergeant's bars, and very clearly said, "Sergeant, if they are not gone in 30 seconds, kill them." He then turned back to face Lack as he continued his instructions to the sergeant, and dispose of their bodies along with that. He was pointing at the red Apache. Sergeant No Name then stepped forward and brought his M16 up to shoulder, pointing it directly at Lack's chest. Now, I'm not a very good poker player, but I sure as hell know when I need to fold my hand and walk away from the table. I quickly turned and walked back towards our truck. I didn't say a word. I got into the driver's seat, started the engine, held my foot down on the brake, and put it in gear. I kept staring straight ahead at the road, praying that Lack would wise up and get in the damn truck. Thankfully, he was climbing into the passenger seat about 3 seconds later, having evidently changed his mindset. Keeping my eyes straight ahead, I immediately drove us the hell out of there. Wartime stories will continue right after this. And now, the conclusion of our story.
Bravo 47, this is command. Come in, over.
After a time, having forgotten all about the radio, it suddenly barked back to life, startling me. I hadn't even realized that the electronic hum had stopped. Dispatch was calling us, asking if we were okay. As calmly as I could, I replied that we were fine. They asked what I had attempted to say in my initial radio transmission before the strange interference had started up. With some hesitation, I replied that we hadn't found anything yet, and that we planned on continuing our search of the area. Several hours later, when we got back to the station at the end of our shift commander pulled us into his office. In what I thought was something of a tentative manner, he asked us if we had ended up finding anything during our search of the woods. As I have previously indicated, this wasn't my first rodeo. I've been down this road before, and I knew full well that silence is golden. Clearing my throat, looking first at Lack, then back at the shift commander, I quietly said that, no sir, we hadn't seen anything out there. Nothing unusual to report. Lack seemed like he was about to say something, but then he simply nodded, said the same thing. Nothing unusual. We all just stood silently in his office for a moment. Commander seemed rather pleased by our replies. I could swear by the look of relief on his face, he knew more than what he was either willing or able to tell us. He then dismissed us, and I was very relieved to be dismissed. I left the station, and Black did too. I don't even think I stopped anywhere to get anything to eat on my way home. I simply drove back to my tiny base apartment and sat in the dark in my tiny living room. The night's events raced through my mind. I wondered why things like this had to happen to me. I couldn't come up with an answer, so finally, I went to bed. We never heard anything about any civilian plane crash. I never asked anyone about it either. For a good number of years afterward, I would find myself lost in thought, wondering if that colonel was bluffing, or if he really would have had Lack and me killed if we had chosen not to leave the crash site. Some years beyond that, after I got married and started a family, now having my own children, I began to question what became of the bodies of the two men who died in that helicopter crash. Where were their final resting places? What were their families told? Or did their remains in that Apache helicopter simply vanish into the void of yet another classified government secret? As for why a Honduran soldier was sitting in the pilot's seat, I may be able to offer you some amount of explanation. I would come to learn that at that time, the Apache was being used to secretly train foreign pilots to fly U.S. military helicopters, and for a specific reason. On March 17, 1988, only a month after the night we discovered that crashed Apache, thousands of U.S. military personnel, some from the 82nd Airborne Division, deployed into Honduras in support of Operation Golden Pheasant. As I have alluded to already, I was also deployed to Honduras. That was in December of 1986, more than a year before this official operation began. My group was assisting with the construction of an airfield, likely to prepare for the upcoming airborne operations. Like the recent war in Vietnam, during my time in the 80s, the U.S. international policy preventing the spread of communism was still in effect in Central America. As with local anti-communist groups who had fought in Vietnam, following an overthrow of the Nicaraguan government in 1979, the U.S. was now backing the anti-communists in Nicaragua. In this case, it was the Contras in their fight against the newly established Marxist and reportedly Soviet-funded government, the Sandinistas. Operation Golden Pheasant was billed as an emergency deployment readiness exercise, a simple joint training exercise between the U.S. and Honduran militaries. But our soldiers were evidently deployed ready to fight, not only to conduct training. The rumor was that the Sandinistas had been illegally operating in Honduras, and that the American troops were sent to push them back out. However, Pentagon officials assured the public that our troops would be staying well away from the border, where the U.S.-backed Contras rebels had reportedly been fighting with the Sandinistas. And whatever the true events were, following this rapid deployment of U.S. troops into Honduras in March, the Sandinistas quickly withdrew, and the U.S. troops were pulled back out by the end of the month. Ultimately, though, the U.S. government's support and funding of the Contras was frowned on by many Americans. When it was discovered that the U.S. government had been covertly selling arms through Iran to bypass congressional approval, it sparked a rather nasty political controversy back in the late 80s. Such is the result of the uncovering of government and military secrets. With nothing else to go on, I'm not sure if this offers some explanation about that crashed helicopter we found, with a Honduran pilot behind the stick, or the strange behavior of that colonel, blacked out soldiers, and even my own night shift commander. Well, what I do know is that I haven't told you everything. I still have a few strange stories left, one of which took place in late 1986, during those few short weeks I spent down in Honduras. But first, speaking about military aircraft falling out of the sky, I suppose I should tell you the most bizarre thing I saw during my time on Fort Campbell.
Guys, I'm not sure if I should make a habit of adding short stories like this to the credits, so you guys go ahead and let me know what you think in the comments. But since this episode involved a crashed Apache, for those of you who saw the Kitsune episode and remember the dedication I did at the beginning of that, my good friend Jimmy was also a pilot whose Apache tragically crashed on Fort Campbell, no less, back in 2018. He was a really fun-loving guy. I don't think I ever saw him angry, no matter how much stress he was under, which was a lot, being a recon Marine. He got annoyed, maybe, but I never saw him raise his voice, never get angry. So I thought for this episode, it might be appropriate for me to share a story about Jimmy. Specifically, the time how Jimmy, myself, and the rest of our recon team almost died in the Philippines, all at the same time. So we were deployed with the 31st MEU. So we were kind of based out of Okinawa. We get on the boat. In this case, it was the USS Peleliu. We floated down to the Philippines and early 2015, and we're going to do these interoperability training exercises, kind of like what was talked about in the episode with the Honduras, doing that kind of inter-military training. You know, just build up rapport between the militaries. So if we ever go to war, you know, once we actually have to start working with our allies, we have that kind of established relationship. That's what the point of it is. So Jimmy, because he was so friendly and able to network, he had gotten us hooked up with Anglico, which is the Air Naval Gunfire Liaison Company with the MEU. And because he had established a good rapport with them, they allowed me to attach my team to their unit to conduct training with them and the Philippine Marines during this exercise. And basically what it was just a week of just blowing stuff up, which was the most fun we probably ever had. It's just, we got an observation point overlooking the valley, and we're calling in aircraft fire and artillery fire and just blowing the crap out of these different targets and old vehicles that had been kind of dropped off in the middle of this targeting range, this big open valley. I'm pretty sure that was the week that Jimmy actually fell in love with the idea of being an Apache pilot, because he just couldn't get enough of calling in aircraft fire and watching these Apaches come by and just like blow the crap out of these various targets and old vehicles that had been just dumped off in the middle of this targeting range. And he's like, bro, dude, this is so cool, man. I want to be a pilot, bro. This would be awesome. So I'm pretty sure that's where it came from. But after the exercise was over and we had to leave the observation point, we had a heck of a time getting out there. One of the trucks got stuck in the mud, and it was just this really funny. Jimmy's out there sunbathing while everyone's trying to pull the truck out of the mud, because all like 3 trucks got stuck in the mud, and Jimmy's just catching some rays. But on the way back, the truck that was the Humvee that was supposed to pick us up was late. It was already after dark. It's raining now. It's starting to rain. It shows up and it's got all of these rucksacks strapped onto the side of it, as if the unit who owned the truck was just using it to carry around their gear. And whoever had done this had also pulled the canvas, the tarp, off the back, and they pulled it off so that they could strap the rucks onto the side, but they'd also pulled it over on top of the rucks so that it was like keeping the gear dry from the rain. So we clamber into the back of the truck and we start driving towards the FOB, the main base area, about a few kilometers away. And this miserable, bumpy, wet ride becomes even worse very quickly because the smell of diesel fumes starts to fill the back of the truck. Now, my experience told me that smelling diesel is not uncommon on really any military aircraft or vehicle. It just kind of goes with the territory. You're going to smell some sort of noxious smell and maybe get a little bit sick. But this was bad, to the point where I was sitting closest to the driver's seat on the passenger side, and I leaned forward. I told the A driver, I said, dude, can you guys smell that? That's bad. Like, can you please like roll down or unzip your little plastic windows so that we can get some fresh air back here? They didn't seem bothered by it. I was like, what's our deal like? Are we really overly sensitive to these fumes? After a bit of driving, it just got worse, and no matter how much air was coming in through the front, it's just terrible, to the point where we're all covering our faces with rags and cloth and gagging and coughing, and some of us are like pulling our heads out of the side of the truck, like out from under the tarp, like just trying to get some fresh air. And I shout back at Jimmy, who's seated on the driver's side, on the near the back of the truck, where the exhaust pipe is. And I'm like, dude, Jimmy, can you turn around and check and see if the exhaust pipe there's a hole in it or something, because can you please check? And I don't think he could. He has rucksack still on, and he was sitting on top of all this gear, and he just couldn't maneuver himself to turn around and look. And it's pitch black in there anyway. There's no lights. Nobody had any sort of light available, I guess, to check. But we're all just dying. We're miserable. Nobody really wants to do anything except just get fresh air. And it was one of those things where asking a military vehicle to stop because you're uncomfortable is kind of something you don't do, right? You just kind of suck it up and just deal with the fumes. But this was like really bad. So finally, as the team leader and the senior guy in the truck, I guess none of the other guys wanted to say anything because they made it feel like they could. But I leaned forward to the driver and like, dude, stop the truck. We got to get out. We can't do this anymore. We're all getting sick back here. We got to stop and get some fresh air. So they stop the truck and we scramble out of the back, and we're just gulping fresh air and feeling the cold rain on our face, which is actually kind of refreshing at this point. And then once I've recovered a little bit, I walk around the side of the truck to check on the exhaust pipe. that was behind Jimmy. After seeing it, I walk back over to Jimmy and I smack him on the top of the helmet, and then I drag him back over so he can look at the exhaust pipe. Whatever knuckle dragger had strapped all this gear onto the side of the truck, and when they pulled the tarp over the gear, they also lifted it up over the top of this very tall exhaust pipe, because this exhaust pipe was meant for fording rivers. Like, it's over the top of the truck. They pulled this tarp over the top of this very tall exhaust and then laid the tarp over the gear and the exhaust, essentially creating a literal gas chamber in the back of this truck, because the exhaust fumes now have nowhere to go except the inside of this tarp, this enclosed truck bed. So we said, screw these guys and their gear, and we just, of course, pulled the tarp back over the exhaust pipe and just let their gear get rained on so we didn't die. But I'm guessing carbon monoxide would have been the issue there, but yeah, that was the time that the team and I nearly all died from carbon monoxide poisoning, because none of us wanted to say anything and demonstrate any weakness. Nobody wanted to be the first one to cop out and say, I can't deal with this anymore. As always, good times in the Philippines. So, thanks for sticking around again to hear another random short story. I was serious about the VPN thing. If you don't have one, I would look into getting one if you can afford it. Protect your information. They don't compensate me for you guys going to the link. They just pay me a flat rate for having the sponsorship. So I would recommend NordVPN. I do think they're a great VPN. I use them myself. So thanks for sticking around, guys. Don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you at part 3.
For the American men and their allies fighting in the jungles of Southeast Asia, encounters with tigers, poisonous reptiles, and massive insects, not to mention enemy soldiers and booby traps, these would certainly have been enough to deal with. But alongside these more conventional threats, soldiers returning from the jungles of Vietnam appear to have encountered something else. Strange creatures which defy rational explanation. The devil creatures of Quang Binh. The mist which hangs before you
Offers you a choice,
to pass through,
or to escape.
beyond it are
Stories
which defy
the explanation
and fly in the face.
of what we know to be real,
It is a void of both reality and impossibility.
of both fact
and superstition.
You alone are left to discern
what to believe, as you pass through what we call
fog.
war.
Monkeys. What are you screaming about now? Oh, shit. Hey. Get down. It was sometime in the evening. A platoon-sized element of American soldiers had been inserted by helicopter into enemy territory, north of the DMZ, to conduct several days of search and destroy operations against the North Vietnamese army. As their column formation slowly wound its way through the dark jungle, the point man at the front of the patrol suddenly stopped, throwing up his fist and quickly signaling to the men behind him to take a knee. He then ran his hand repeatedly across his throat. Possible enemy soldiers ahead, he was saying. Looking back towards the movement he had spotted, the men tried to make out anything that would identify the unknown threat. What appeared to be a group of 4 men, walking in single file through the jungle. It was difficult to see them clearly, as the thick jungle was hiding both groups from each other, but the soft moonlight coming from the canopy above is what gave these 4 men away, as they otherwise appeared to be moving soundlessly. These men were clearly experts at moving quietly through dense jungle, possibly a team of NBA sappers. After a moment, the American soldiers close enough to see them realized they couldn't make out any weapons or anything that looked like a military uniform. What they had thought might be helmets were in fact the tops of these men's heads, as if they were all bald, with the moonlight through the canopy reflecting the hairless outlines of their skulls. But was that moonlight? Squinting through the trees, the soldiers could swear that these men were glowing, as if they themselves were emitting a soft aura of light. And whatever they were wearing was smooth and highly reflective and dazzling, as if they were wearing tight clothing made from snakeskin. But no. On second glance, the soldiers were shocked to realize it was their skin. Scaly, reptilian skin. And far from being North Vietnamese soldiers whose average height was somewhere around 5.5 feet tall, these men, these things, all 4 of them appeared to stand at least 7 feet tall. Entirely uncertain of what they were even looking at, the men at the head of their formation said nothing, holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. Either unaware of the American platoon's presence or choosing to ignore them entirely, these 4 beings kept silently walking by them until they eventually just disappeared into the jungle. With no reason to pursue them, the soldiers waited for the all clear before standing up. The point man checked his compass, and they continued their own patrol, never catching sight of the strange creatures again. But another patrol evidently did.
Hey, Mac, go ahead and shut her off. Williams,
Yes, sir.
sun will be up soon. Go ahead and cut the engines. We'll, drift with the current for a while.
Throughout the war, American teams were deployed deep behind enemy lines in the conduct of guerrilla warfare, hoping to cut off the enemy supply lines, to stop the harassment of locals, and to destroy any hidden bases and weapon depots they might find. A 2-boat team of 8 soldiers has likewise been inserted on a search and destroy mission, cruising in their patrol boats along a river just north of the DMZ, their mission lasting throughout the night and into the early morning hours. At the onset of these night missions, a curfew had been implemented. Locals had been warned to remain at home, since the men had trouble seeing in the dark, and the standard procedure for these missions was to fire on anything that moved, with the presumption being that anyone caught out at night, whether on the river or in the jungle, would be an enemy soldier. Enemy fire could break out from the shoreline at any time without warning, so the men were on constant guard, their eyes warily scanning the riverbank for any sign of movement or other indication of enemy presence. But now that the sun was coming up and visibility was improving, these men would have to begin operating under more restrictive guidelines for firing on unknown targets. This might explain why, for some unknown reason, the patrol officer ordered the boats to the shoreline to conduct a short reconnaissance patrol away from the river. After leaving the boats and passing through a section of trees, the men reached the edge of a large jungle clearing. Perhaps they wanted to mark the location as a possible drop zone for future patrol inserts or extractions by helicopter. Whatever their reasons, these men couldn't help but notice that this section of jungle was eerily quiet. They had long become accustomed to hearing the constant droning sounds of insects, monkeys, and birds. But now, this notable silence could mean the presence of human activity, possibly that of enemy soldiers. Perhaps that is what prompted their commander to conduct this investigation. Moving into the clearing in the dim light, at some point the team began noticing a number of piles of what appeared to be animal dung scattered around the area. As they momentarily paused to examine these unusual piles, they suddenly heard crashing sounds coming from the nearby tree line. They were shocked to see what appeared to be several large humanoid creatures lumbering out of the dense brush, heading straight for them. These things were unlike anything they'd ever seen, tall,
at least 7 or 8 feet in height, with bright yellow skin and 3-digit hands and feet, with fingers and toes that ended in sharp claws. The faces of these strange creatures were flat and sported large, snake-like eyes, with only a couple of slits for a nose. The creatures were on top of them before they even had a chance to react. But surprisingly, these giant, yellow-skinned beings were said to have passed right by these men, seemingly not even paying attention to them at all, disappearing once again into the opposite tree line. Completely spooked by the encounter, the frightened soldiers decided to immediately return to their boats. But as they moved through the section of jungle between the clearing and the river, they once again heard the loud sounds of jungle brush being trampled behind them. Whatever the creatures were, they were now following them. The men broke into a run themselves, their own loud movements now adding to the noise of the crashing sounds behind them, which indicated the creatures were drawing closer and closer. Some of the men aimed their rifles behind them, firing blindly, but it seemed to have no effect on slowing down their pursuers. Terrified, bursting through the tree line and clambering into their boats on the riverbank, the men apparently continued to fire on these creatures, watching them twitch as the bullets seemed to bounce off of their hard, scaly skin. Confused and likely terrified themselves at the sight of these monsters, the coxswains quickly pulled their crafts away from the riverbank and throttled them away. As they left, the men purportedly saw the haunting sight of dozens of these massive humanoids now gathered along the riverbank, watching them leave. The shoreline seemed to be illuminated by a powerful glow emanating from the creatures' bodies. This next encounter is told from the perspective of the soldier who shared the story. In 1970, I was serving as a corporal in the U.S. Army, deployed to South Vietnam in a region about 30 miles south of the DMZ. At the time, I was second in command of a squad of soldiers. We had set up a bivouac in a jungle area that had a few steep hills. That evening, my section was ordered to patrol one of the small valleys west of the encampment. We moved out, led by our sergeant. Not long after entering one of the small valleys, we detected movement ahead of us. It seemed to be scattered activity, so we doubted it was Viet Cong, but we weren't positive. We hunkered down for about 15 minutes, getting occasional glimpses of something moving within the trees and brush. There wasn't enough light to detect what we were observing, even though the moonlight was bright that night. After a while, the activity halted, so we continued to slowly move through the valley. About this time, things got very strange. As we approached a sheer rock wall on the side of a hill, it looked like someone, or something, had stacked large stones and boulders in the pass in front of us. There was also an opening in the hillside that looked like a cave entrance, approximately 5 foot high and 3 foot wide, narrowing at the top. While observing the passageway, it appeared to have been cut away by machinery. The edges were smooth, with small, even-spaced grooves. We were puzzled by this because we had never seen enemy caves like this, just underground tunnels. Our sergeant suggested that it might be a BC supply depot, so we started to assess how we were going to investigate the cave. We noticed a putrid odor emanating from the entrance. The only thing I can compare it to was rotting eggs and human decay. It was so revolting that a few of the soldiers were becoming ill and started to back away into the jungle, including our sergeant. I was directing a light into the entrance in order to observe anything, but there was a haze that was impossible to see through. We had no idea what this thing was. So the entire squad took a position in the heavy brush approximately 150 feet from the entrance, far enough not to be detected, but close enough to observe the cave entrance. We quietly remained there for what seemed like forever. The jungle was strangely calm, though we heard rumbling sounds coming from the distance. It was really eerie. Our sergeant was sitting near me, talking to himself. It was obvious that he was frightened. I was looking at the rest of the squad. Each had wide eyes and was scanning the area. Tired as we were, it was clear that no one was going to doze off during this patrol. After several hours, dawn was approaching and it started to lighten up. I checked my watch. It was just before 0500 hours. Just then, we noticed movement in front of the cave. A being, I first thought it was a man, moved through the entrance into the clearing in front of the cave. As it stood up from a crouch,